The winter of 1889 had already been harsh, but no one expected the cold to strike so suddenly that week. The sky that morning had been clear when Lena and Naya began their journey across the high desert. Both women were in their early 20s, strong and used to traveling long distances. They carried food, blankets, and a few small tools, planning to deliver them to a family camp 2 valleys away. They were used to the land, its silence, its long roads, and its sharp winds. But even they did not sense how quickly the weather would shift that day. The wind first touched their faces as a light breath, the kind that usually came before dusk. But soon the breeze turned cold enough to sting their cheeks. The clouds gathered in strange shapes, long and gray, rolling across the sky as if trying to race them. Naya looked up often, tightening her scarf around her neck. Lena watched the ground, noticing how the dust swirled in tiny circles, something she had seen before when storms were close. They were halfway across an empty stretch when they heard the soft sound of hooves behind them. They turned to see a lone cowboy riding toward them on a tall chestnut horse. His coat was covered with dust, and a long scarf hid half his face. He raised one hand in greeting, slowing his horse as he approached. The cowboy introduced himself as Cole Hartley, a ranch hand moving cattle toward a sheltered pasture before the cold rolled in. His voice was polite, quiet, and steady, the kind of voice that came from spending more time around animals than people. He asked where the 2 women were headed, and when he heard their answer, he frowned slightly and looked toward the sky. He told them the storm was coming fast, faster than normal. The clouds were dropping low, meaning the wind would soon turn wild. He knew of a small line shack not far from where they stood. It belonged to the ranch he worked for, and it wasn't much, but it had walls strong enough to keep the wind out. Lena and Naya exchanged a worried look. They wanted to reach their family camp by nightfall, but the air around them felt colder by the minute. They could see small flakes already dancing in the wind. With a quiet nod between them, they agreed to follow Cole. The trail toward the shack was rough. Snow began falling harder, blowing across their faces and leaving thin white lines on their eyelashes. The horses snorted and shook their heads, uncomfortable with the sudden shift in weather. Lena kept her blanket close to her shoulders, and Naya pressed one hand against her horse's neck, trying to calm the animal. Cole rode ahead but looked back often, checking that they were still behind him. By the time they reached the shack, the snow was thick enough to hide the tops of their boots. The building was small and old, built from rough wood that had darkened from years of storms. Part of the roof sagged slightly under the weight of snow that had gathered during older winters. When Cole pushed the door open, it creaked loudly, and a puff of dust floated into the air. Inside, the place was colder than expected. The walls were thin, and a draft slipped through the gaps. There was no stove or fire pit, only a few broken crates, a pile of old sacks, and a dirt floor that carried the chill of the ground. But at least it blocked the wind. Lena rubbed her hands together and blew warm air into them. Naya checked the corners, hoping to find something useful, but all she saw were cobwebs and a few rusty tools. Cole paced the room slowly, testing the walls and making sure the roof wouldn't collapse. He said they would need to stay until the storm passed. The wind outside roared louder with every minute that slipped by, rattling the boards as if trying to push its way in. Naya pulled her blanket tighter, feeling the cold creep through her boots. Lena said softly that they were lucky they found shelter at all. Cole agreed. As the temperature dropped even more, they realized the blankets they carried were not enough. The air inside the shack was so cold that their breath floated in white clouds. Their fingers stiffened, and their noses tingled painfully. Cole explained the danger clearly. If they did not share body heat, they might not last the night. It was a simple survival truth he learned from years herding cattle through rough weather. The 2 women listened, and though the idea made them nervous at first, they understood he was right. The cold was already sinking deep into their bones, and if they tried to sleep alone under separate blankets, they would only grow colder. After a short discussion, the 3 of them agreed to lie close together under all the blankets and buffalo robes they had. They spread the thickest robe on the dirt floor, brushing away small rocks and shaking off old dust. Lena placed her blanket on top, and Naya added hers. Cole carefully laid his heavy saddle blanket over the pile. They sat together at first, trying to get used to the nearness of one another. The wind outside grew louder, slamming against the walls like waves breaking on shore. Slowly, as the cold deepened, they lay down shoulder to shoulder, each fully dressed in their warmest clothes. They pulled the blankets and robes over themselves until only the tops of their faces showed. Their shared warmth slowly began pushing away the numbness in their fingers and toes. No one spoke at first. They listened to the storm, the long, low howl of it, the rhythm of a powerful force moving across the desert. After several minutes, Cole broke the silence. He spoke about the cattle he had driven earlier in the day and how he hoped they all found shelter. His voice was steady, but carried a tired edge. Naya told a story about her younger brother, who always bragged that he could outrun the wind when he was a child. Lena laughed softly and added that her brother once tried to race a horse and fell face first into a cactus. The warmth of their small laughter made the cold feel less sharp. As the night grew darker, small bits of snow slipped under the door, gathering in soft piles near their boots. Cole shifted a little to block the draft, and the two women repositioned the blankets to keep the warmth trapped around them. Their shoulders pressed together, not in discomfort, but in unspoken agreement that staying close kept them safe. Hours passed slowly. They stayed awake, knowing that falling asleep in such cold could be dangerous. Their arms and legs grew stiff from staying in one position too long. They took turns adjusting slightly, careful not to let cold air slip inside the blankets. Every so often, one of them would ask, "You still awake?" And the others would answer with a quiet, "Yes," just to keep each other alert. The wind outside screamed harder than ever, making the thin walls tremble like old paper. Snow slammed against the roof, sliding down and piling around the small shack. Cole said the storm sounded like the kind that buried whole roads. Lena imagined the desert covered in white hills by morning. Naya wondered aloud how long it would take for the world outside to even look familiar again. To keep their minds awake and calm, they shared stories of their families. Lena spoke about her grandmother, who taught her how to read clouds and predict weather. Cole said he had learned the same skill from an old rancher who claimed he could smell storms before they formed. Naya talked about her mother, who always told her to never fear nature but to respect it. Their voices drifted softly between them, mixing with the sound of the wind. At moments, the cold crept in again, sharp like needles, and they pulled the blankets tighter. Cole gently reminded them to keep breathing steady and to stay awake. Naya hummed a simple tune her mother used to sing during long winter nights. The soft melody filled the small space, comforting all three of them. As the night stretched on, the storm grew even louder, as if it had reached the peak of its strength. The walls shook, dust fell from the beams, and the floor felt colder than stone. But under the thick layers of blankets, their shared warmth created a small shelter within the larger one. Their bodies grew warmer slowly, little by little, until the danger felt manageable again. None of them knew what time it was, but they could feel the night deepening. They lay quietly, listening for any change in the wind that might signal the storm beginning to fade. Lena whispered that they would see the sunrise if they stayed strong. Cole said he believed her. Naya nodded, her eyes heavy but still awake. And so, the three strangers, brought together by a winter storm, stayed close on that cold dirt floor, trusting the thin walls of the shack and the warmth of each other's presence. The night felt endless, but they did not give in to fear or sleep. They waited together, hoping the morning would bring calm skies, light, and the chance to continue their separate journeys across the desert. The storm finally began to quiet down sometime near dawn, though none of them knew the exact hour. The night had felt too long, too heavy, and too cold for anyone to count the minutes. Lena was the first to sense the sudden stillness outside. Her eyes had been closed for only a moment when she noticed the change in the air. The wind no longer howled. Instead, everything felt strangely soft and quiet, like the world had paused to catch its breath. Cole opened his eyes soon after, blinking away the tiredness that had settled deep in his bones. His shoulders were stiff, and his legs ached from staying in the same position for so many hours. Naya was awake too, though she had been trying not to move because any tiny shift made the cold air slip into their blankets. She whispered that the wind sounded different. Cole nodded and slowly reached to lift a corner of the top blanket. A cold draft touched their faces, but it wasn't as sharp as before. The worst part of the storm had passed. They sat up slowly, stretching their arms and rubbing warmth back into their hands. Their breath still floated in tiny white clouds, proof that the air inside the shack was still freezing, but the danger was not as fierce as during the night. Lena stood first, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she walked to the small window near the back wall. Snow covered the glass from the outside, but a thin line at the top let in a streak of blue light. She whispered that morning had arrived. Cole got to his feet with a groan and brushed dust off his coat. He walked to the door and pushed it gently. It didn't move. He pressed harder, and still the door refused to open. Snow had piled up heavily during the night, trapping them inside the tiny shack. Naya helped Lena fold their blankets, and Cole worked at the door until he managed to shift it just enough for a small gap to appear. A rush of cold air poured into the room, making them all shiver again. Cole said they needed to dig their way out, or the sun would rise higher and freeze the snow even harder, making it more difficult to escape later. The two women nodded in agreement. They all stepped into the doorway one at a time. The snow outside reached almost up to Cole's waist. The drifts around the shack had smoothed into round hills, hiding the ground completely. The horses, tied under the roof overhang, were covered in a thin blanket of snow and ice. They shook themselves sharply when they saw the three figures emerge. The morning light was beautiful in a strange way. The desert, normally filled with warm colors, had turned pure white. The sky was a pale blue, washed clean by the storm. The air was colder than before, but quiet, so quiet that every small movement they made seemed louder than usual. Lena stared at the land in amazement. Naya whispered that it felt like they were standing in another world. Cole took a deep breath and began clearing a narrow path with his gloved hands. The women joined him, using pieces of broken wood from inside the shack as makeshift shovels. It was slow work, and their fingers soon grew stiff again. Even so, they managed to create a small channel wide enough to step through. Their boots sank deep into the snow with every step, but they kept pushing forward. Once the horses were fully uncovered, Cole checked each one carefully. Their breath rose in warm clouds, and though they were cold and tired, they seemed strong enough to travel. Cole rubbed their necks gently to warm them and thanked them softly for enduring the night. When the animals were ready, Lena and Naya packed their blankets back onto their saddles. Cole tied his gear and adjusted the straps. Before leaving, they looked back at the small shack. It had protected them through the worst night of their lives. Despite its broken roof and drafty walls, it had stood firm. Lena touched the wooden frame lightly, as if offering silent gratitude. They mounted their horses and began riding slowly through the white landscape. The snow was deep, and every step required patience. Cole rode ahead at times to check the safest direction. The usual trails were buried, and nothing looked the same under the thick snow. Naya kept her eyes on distant landmarks, rock formations, the curve of small hills, trying to match them with the memories of the land she knew so well. As the sun continued to rise, the snow sparkled in bright waves. They rode in silence for a long time, each of them thinking about the night they had survived. Lena wondered what her family would say when she told them the story. She knew they would be grateful she had found shelter. Naya thought about the tune she had hummed in the dark hours of the storm, and how it had kept her calm. Cole reminded himself how lucky he was to have crossed paths with them. If he had been alone in that cold, the night might have ended differently. After some time, they reached a small ridge where the snow wasn't as deep. The horses moved more easily there, and the air felt slightly warmer. They stopped to rest for a moment. The sun had reached the tops of the hills now, casting soft shadows across the white ground. Cole took out a small bag of dried meat from his saddle and offered some to the women. They shared the simple meal gratefully. While they rested, Naya spotted a hawk circling above them. Its wings cut across the sky in slow, graceful movements. She took it as a sign that the storm had passed completely and the land was returning to its normal rhythm. Lena smiled and said that nature always found a way to balance itself again. Cole agreed quietly. They continued their journey until the land began to show hints of the familiar desert beneath. The snow thinned, revealing patches of dry earth and short bushes bending under the weight of white powder. The cold air lifted little by little, and the warmth of the sun touched their faces. By midday, they could see the split in the hills that marked the point where their paths would separate. This was the place where Lena and Naya needed to turn east toward their family camp. Cole would head west toward the ranch. They slowed their horses and stopped at the fork in the trail. For a moment, none of them spoke. The quiet between them felt peaceful and full of understanding. Lena thanked Cole first. Her voice was steady but warm. She said that if he had not warned them about the storm, they might have been caught out in the open. Naya added that his quick thinking had helped them survive the coldest night they had ever known. Cole shook his head gently and said they all survived because they worked together. He meant it sincerely. They exchanged a few more words, simple, honest ones about safety, health, and hope for clearer weather ahead. Then they lifted their reins softly. Lena and Naya turned their horses toward the east, and Cole guided his horse toward the west. They rode slowly at first, glancing back once or twice, giving silent farewells. Then, the distance between them grew wider. As the day warmed, Lena and Naya felt their spirits rise. They talked about how their families would react when hearing the story. They smiled, imagining the many ways the tale would be retold in the years ahead. Cole rode alone but felt strangely comforted. He knew he would remember the two women for a long time, how calm they had remained during the storm, how they had shared stories to keep the cold from sinking too deep into their hearts. The desert slowly returned to its natural colors as the snow melted. Footprints faded behind them. The storm was now just a memory, a difficult one, but also a meaningful one. And though they traveled in different directions, they carried the same understanding of that night. Strangers who became companions in a moment of need, bound by the simple desire to survive until morning.